Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, April 15th, and this is the April public meeting of ANC 5D's Zoning and Development Committee. I think tonight's agenda tonight's meeting will be pretty short. We don't have any developers who've asked to attend this evening. And in fact, just looking out there right now, the only people in attendance are zoning committee members themselves. So I think we can just kind of have an open discussion, and we'll keep an eye out to see if any neighbors decide to dial in or attend. And but I think we were just chatting. For those who don't know, the ANC 5D just this past Tuesday approved 4 new members to the zoning committee, and the intention is to approve a whole slate of new members. That way, we have at least a couple members from every single member district. And so, yeah, there is nothing on the agenda. I'm going to open the floor up. Zach, we were chatting earlier, and you had mentioned an idea of a development guidelines. Could you want to?
Yeah. So unless anyone has anything else, I wanted to talk about this tonight. So obviously, in most of our zoning cases, we deal with repeating issues. So I would like to draft a sort of brochure style guide, lookbook, guidance document to hand to developers, to land use attorneys that use have clients in the ANC, and just have something as a reference guide to kind of promote smart development, maintain neighborhood charisma and character. I think initially what I think of is the reduction of brick buildings in Trinidad. There's been a move away from brick and using different siding materials that I think is counterproductive to kind of the look and feel of Trinidad, when all of our municipal buildings are brick, when all of the oldest homes in this neighborhood are brick, and systematically they're kind of being reduced away. So that's just one example, but making sure that we're keeping in mind, various parking issues, trash issues, different shading issues, things that just come up all the time, and having smart development, smart growth, and not making overly grand changes to the way the neighborhood looks and feels, while still promoting that growth. So it's kind of a balance issue. I think ideally we would have chapters or sections for Ivy City, Union Market, Trinidad, Carver Langston, and have kind of things situated for all those different areas, because they all have their own looks and feels, and people that live there, and opinions of the long-term residents that have been there. So I think it should be reflective of that as well. And I think something like this would help us avoid some of the long drawn out conversations we have, preemptively fix some of the issues that we have with some of the development we're seeing, and one, make our lives easier, but also make it more consistent, and make sure that we're putting out the same kind of messaging and desires, and promoting more consistency with the developers going forward. So that's the idea.
Yeah,
So
no, I like the idea of a guide document, but I'm not sure we might be creating a minefield by calling it a style guide, because I mean, personally, like, I don't care if somebody wanted to put up an ultra modern glass, thing next to my house. What I care about is, like, I personally care about, like, preserving and promoting family size housing or affordable housing.
Yeah.
So if that has to, maybe it may not be my personal style, but we do ask the same questions of every time, whether it's a neighbor or a developer asking for zoning relief. We end up having to ask the same questions. And I think prior to them arriving to us, we could kind of tell them these are the kind of, and obviously it could become a bit of a values document as well, but maybe not so much architectural style guidelines.
Yeah, I want to stay away from the style.
Yeah.
That's not the purpose of this. I think there will be elements of that. And certainly like, hey, this worked well for this project.
Yeah.
Because this was the initial ask, and this is what they ended up doing, and this was well received, and the project ended up, the tweaks they made worked better. And I feel like that's information that people will do better work that's more reflective of what they want to actually build if they see that ahead of time. So stylistically, yeah, that's going to be a small part of it, but I think more fundamentally will be what is kind of the nuts and bolts of the development, and how does it actually work and flow in the neighborhood wherever it might be, and how it needs to work and work the best, essentially.
Well, I support you volunteering to do that.
I think that's a great idea. And you mentioned flowchart. That would be another really good component, I think, to explain to the public and neighbors, what the process looks like with engagement,
Mhm.
depending on what their situation is, because it's quite. I don't think people really know what's involved until they get into it, and then they're like,
Yeah.
then they realize, oh, there's multiple meetings that they need to go to, and the time frame could be 6 months or something before they get in front of zoning.
Mhm.
And I could see that could be a component of this brochure.
Zach,
Yeah,
I
I
will
think
do some
developing some of this to the resident focus and something that's kind of more comprehensive for the developer as well. Something a little more condensed that someone would be like, okay, I kind of understand how zoning works now. I think that would
Well,
be helpful.
I think I think developers know how zoning works. I think the neighbors, because we know this stuff because we've been through like dozens of cases. When it first comes to when you're a neighbor and a big project first comes next door, there's so much fear and stress because it's new for them. So if they just even had, and I am disappointed that sometimes there aren't easy flow charts in DCRA's websites so the neighbors can understand step by step. This is so Andrew, I love that idea. And Zach, if you want, I can create some PowerPoint bubble flow charts so that you can include in the report. Like, I think that would be really, I think would help really greatly reduce the stress on the neighbors, because that becomes an impediment to development. Just the fear when neighbors are like, hey, because people forget, like these brick buildings, like they require repointing every 50 to 100 years.
Mhm.
Like these buildings are, there's significant investment a lot of these buildings are at the end of their serviceable life and require, all of their cast iron pipes for the sewer are all at their end of the service life. There's so much work that needs to get done. When a developer comes in and says, I'm going to do a gut job and completely redo the house, it's a good thing because otherwise that house needs it,
Mhm.
So yeah, no, I like the idea of a flow chart. I really do.
Yep.
I think from the perspective of the land use attorneys representing developers, they would love that as well. Like if someone gives you a guidebook for how to properly advise your client, that is a godsend.
And also, I think it sets the expectation too. If you're coming to Trinidad to build something, here's the book,
Mhm.
right? This is it. If you do everything, not that you have to do everything that we say, but if you follow these recommendations, there's a very good chance that the community will be well received of your project, and the zoning committee will be well received, and there shouldn't be a lot of issues. And it'll just be, you did everything right. Great. I think it's a win-win for everybody. It feels, I don't want to diminish what we do in these meetings, but I think it will free up some potential time to focus on other things, and look at map amendments and look at all types of things that we might want to do in the future. But I think some of the nitty gritty stuff that kind of clogs up our time and just doesn't let us do other things, I think this is a good use of our time to kind of also maybe even investigate for ourselves, what are the kind of true issues that are facing, it's easy to get lost when you're looking at one individual project. You don't look at kind of the span of projects in a group, and maybe we're building to something that's not sustainable in 20 years of similar development, or we are and we just don't know it. So I think all of this is kind of like big picture, and also kind of micro manage some of the issues that we know that we're going to see development tomorrow or 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think one approach that may help us from getting too into the weeds on certain things where we know we wouldn't be able to really be effective is if we think about things from like a level of performance. So when we talk about like the brick, we could go in and we could research all kinds of different materials that we would, you know, support, or we could describe what we think, you know, a facade, you know, that works in our neighborhood looks like. We can kind of come up with some kind of general description. Same with how, you know, a development works or how it operates, you know, go back to the trash situation. We could define what we think a workable trash situation is very briefly, you know, like a one sentence kind of thing. That becomes like the rubric or the jumping off point for the discussion with the developer. And they also get an idea of, you know, what we're looking for. And I have a feeling that, you know, this checklist is almost like an agenda for each of these projects that comes in. We're going to immediately see that they satisfy 8 out of 10, and there's really 2 topics that we really need to focus on for the meeting, which is kind of.
I think the BZA case we were talking about, 2359, is a good example of this. There was discussion initially of the roof deck, you know, with a whole full-size door opening out onto the roof. And they changed that to those little pop-up patches. And if that's something that we like better than, you know, full addition, you know, even if you put another floor and then you do another roof thing, if that's better than another roof addition or rooftop deck, then, you know, that's something we should encourage people to build. You know, like, hey, this is less impactful, the shadow's not as much, it's more subtle from the sidewalk. You know, here's something for you to consider. Maybe you didn't even think this was something that you could do or wanted to do, but here's an idea. So I think there's tons of opportunities for us to kind of subtly give good advice to people before they even start drawing anything.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of the design things we're mentioning are really more about like the philosophy of design than having to be like super specific. You know, like with the roof example, it doesn't have to be that we, you know, prefer the window hatches in all situations, but if you're next to a lower building than yourself, you know, like we can just kind of set the tone so that it's really more like of a concept that you should be aspiring to than a specific like use, you know, window hatches type thing. Like keep existing brick facades, but not necessarily like build all new buildings in brick, but it's more like, you know, keep the building character when it already exists, you know.
And I'm speaking in specifics only because, you know, I've got about like 4 months of this behind me. So like, that's an example that really sticks out, and I'm sure in 2 years I'll forget about it. But yeah, you're absolutely, I think it is all about the philosophy. And that's kind of, you know, to give someone an insight into the philosophy before they're even having those conversations, I think is valuable. And I think you're totally right.
So how do we do that? Do we need to, would we start a Google Doc and share it amongst the ZDC group?
I like
and
that
everyone
idea.
can go in and kind of add to it.
I would imagine so. Certainly everyone has different experiences and backgrounds that will, you know, facilitate expertise in different areas. You know, I'm sure Kevin can recall off the top of his head all the great controversial cases of the BZA that like, that's a good example of that, and you know, whatnot. And certainly Stacy has an architecture background. And
yeah, instead of being negative, I think one thing we could do is we could provide case studies of when a developer did something good that we all supported, and they'll get the message. You know, I remember there was a project on Oak Street. One developer, he had 2 projects side by side, and he did that thing with the roof hatches. And I think that particular lot was really didn't have a very deep backyard, but he did really interesting things by keeping the HVAC the mini splits were elevated off the ground, but the rooftop deck, he did a bunch of, you know, there's a lot of projects that have done really good stuff, and you always say, well, I wish more people would do that. So I think we could take that approach instead of trying to be punitive and say we won't approve this. We can just they'll get the message. They'll see like, oh, these are things that people appreciate. I mean, I appreciate when developers, you know, and I understand like we need a diversity of different housing styles, but when you have, for instance, like 1900 Fenwick is going to become a 127 unit building. I think the vast majority of those are 2 bedrooms. There are some 3. There's no studios, but like I don't think there's going to be. We're definitely going to have a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom. We don't. I feel we almost don't have to worry about those buildings being those unit sizes. So I do want to. That's always kind of my, Rosetta Stone is I want to be sure that we hold on as much as possible to 3 bedroom units in the neighborhood. So yeah, I like the idea of, I mean, Zach, before everyone goes in there, if you want to at least maybe like set up, and you could just have chapter titles. If you wanted to maybe start the document, because I remember what helped when I wrote the what do you call them? I'm forgetting it. The charter notes. What do you call the thing we used to define how the zoning committee was supposed to work?
Bylaws.
The bylaws. So when I did the first draft and then I actually sent it out and I had other people review it, but like it would have been a mess if I just said 5 people are going to start working simultaneously. So I think, Zach, if you want to start it and then you can assign us sections and just put in like a thing that says insert flow chart here, Kevin, and I'll go and I'll do some work. Like, but yeah, I would say pretty quickly I would like to get in there, but we should give you some time to at least create.
Yeah, I think there's some examples of similar things that I'm thinking about that already exist. So I might be able to kind of build a template off of those.
Okay. And I like the idea of doing Google Docs because it's, we can collaborate and work on that together.
Yeah. And I would think, obviously, this would be a zoning committee thing for a long time. And then once we kind of have it together, this would be something I would want to have presented at the ANC and then have it, maybe we revisit it every year and see if there's anything that needs to be changed or updated or added, taken out, whatever.
Yeah. I like the idea of almost being proactive in helping developers say, you're going to run into this problem and here's a solution. There's a problem I've run into with my own house is when a developer wanted to build a 3-story next to mine, they're shading my solar system. There's a company called Brooklyn Solar Canopy, and they basically make these, if you just Google Brooklyn Solar Canopy, they built them apparently in like New York City, fire code prevents people from putting solar panels flat on a roof, where in DC, solar panels have to be as low as possible on the roof. So DC is more concerned about wind loads, whereas in New York City has to do with fire codes, and a panel has to be high enough that a fireman can swing an axe to cut into the roof of a building. It's a very different philosophy from the codes, but I would love, and I reached out to the company to see, I would love if that in DC, if when a developer decides, I want to build up, I'm going to shade your solar system, but not to worry, I'm going to buy you a canopy. We'll elevate your panels so your panels are still getting sunlight, and now you have a rooftop deck. Like that'd be a great win-win. Now they're not cheap, but that might, there's a lot of people who, but neither are solar systems. And a lot of neighbors push back against development when they think their solar panels are going to be shaded. So like, so yeah, I'd almost like to have time to dig into that myself to find out, like, is that something, can we convince one person to do this in the city or convince a developer? But I don't think it's not approved. There hasn't been a single, because I reached out to the company and I said, has anyone in DC install one of these? And they're like, yeah, lots of discussions, but no one's actually gotten it permitted yet. But it's a cool looking system. But that's just like one example. If we can get that, so that way, because I've heard of neighbors rushing to install a solar system real quick as a defensive measure against development, and that's not the intention that goes against the spirit of the zoning relief. People should not be doing that. I mean, ultimately, like, I'm okay with the developer shading my system only because like it was a bit of a negotiation, and we actually got the building smaller, and they did take other steps to mitigate the shading on the system. So that's
Well, I
one
feel-
example. I'm sure there's a dozen examples of like things that we could help them. That way neighbors don't feel they're being personally damaged.
I think there is probably a treasure trove of interesting, subtle examples of things working really well that, unless it was shared with somebody, nobody would ever know about it. And I think we can offer that kind of support. This reminds me of a project that I was working on 9th Street in Shaw, and we were converting a row home next to the Carter G. Woodson house, 9th and Q, into a restaurant. And nobody told us that was the dumbest thing we could ever do. There were so many problems. We had to fix the entire water system for the entire street. That was not negotiable. The gas lines were like this big. We needed like 5-inch, and they were like 1/2 inch. We were like, how does any of this work? How did this building get built? Anyway, the guy who lived 2 houses over and had a retail at the bottom, he was like, oh man, you guys should have talked to me. I would have told you never to even do that. And I feel like if we can avoid one of those situations or help somebody avoid any of them, that would be helpful in developing smarter, and just doing things the best way that they can be done. I'm sure there's a million things, just like the solar panels. I'm sure there's a million different variations of that across a whole bunch of disciplines that we can just do everything better.
I was looking at my list from when we started the zoning committee like almost 2 years ago, and we had these projects we were thinking of doing, and one of them was to create a double-sided pamphlet in English and Spanish, providing contact for zoning committee members. So if they had a question, they knew how to reach out to. The idea was when a project started in the neighborhood, we could like pamphlet around those houses. That way the neighbors would know, like, hey, if I have a problem, who can I call? A lot of times they call DCRA just to educate them. That didn't get off the ground because we just didn't have enough members early on. I think we wanted to, identify specific zoning committee members to lead special projects for the, identifying and tracking abandoned properties. There's several very well-known blighted properties in the neighborhood when we're like, why is that building just sitting there? Like it should be developed. It's been sitting unused, like no roof on the building, only a front wall being held up by metal, like that place on Moore Street. It's like, why is that still, why is that not gone to a tax sale, and a developer buy it to develop it? It just seems, it's a shame for the people who have to live alongside those blighted properties. So that would be, yeah, I think, no, I think some of the new zoning committee members, I think, didn't attend tonight. They were probably surprised because normally these meetings are always held on the third Thursday, and it's usually the week after the ANC meeting. But this month, April 1st was a Thursday, so we just had this meeting 2 days afterwards. But yeah, so Zach, you're going to start the draft, and is that something you think we could put on the agenda? Would you like to present like the skeleton of that document at the May meeting?
Yeah, well, let's anticipate having a broader, a little bit more substantive conversation about it.
Okay.
With what I kind of develop and find, and I'll get that to everybody.
Somebody has ANC 5D. Let's see who this is. We have
That's Sedell.
Sedell.
Commissioner Moore.
Hello, Commissioner Moore.
Hello.
We're just wrapping up the meeting. We were just making plans amongst ourselves. There were no developers presenting tonight, and we were just kind of discussing plans for things we'd like to do with the committee.
Okay. Well, I won't tie you guys up. I'll just go back and watch the video.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, does anyone else have, I mean, I know I want to be respectful of people's time. I know the meeting normally goes to 8:30, but if we have an opportunity to end sooner, I don't want to lose that. Does anyone have other points they'd like to raise?
I don't have
No, I
anything
think it's
else.
a great idea to do this document. So
I do too.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
And
that
this is
way-
going to be a group effort. This is not me doing it. I want everyone's input, and I'm going to be wrong about some things, and I'm going to be right about some things, and we're all going to have different opinions. And it needs to be a living, updatable kind of thing that we all feel good about. And I think it's definitely achievable, and I think other people are doing it well. I think we can learn from that and kind of make something our own, make it special.
Right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for attending, and I will see you guys all, if not sooner. We'll see you guys in May. Have a good evening. Be safe, and I hope you've all got at least your first shot by now.
Both.
Oh yeah, I was.
Oh, both.
September.
I'm getting my second shot next week, so I'm looking forward to being sick for one day, but looking forward to this all being over.
Very good.
All right. Cheers,
All right,
everybody.
everyone.
All right.
Good night.
Be safe.
Right, y'all.